Definitely.
Hi, folks. Hi, my friends. Welcome to the new episode of Deep Six, the Deep State. I want to thank everybody for their wonderful participation in the last two episodes, the one on yesterday, Monday, and the one on Friday. So far, we've gotten 180,000 people to watch the one on Friday, and 156,000 so far, still counting, to watch the one that we did yesterday, talking about the expanding nature of this uranium scandal and how it's definitely ensnaring both Bill and Hillary Clinton and the rest of the Democratic establishment likely too. This is very major, and I'm very happy that we can do this. The mainstream media doesn't cover this stuff. The New York Times is yet to run its first story on this subject, or the Washington Post, even though it was the Times that ran the original story of Peter Schweizer's book, Clinton Cash. But that was because it was pre-released to the Times, and that was a deal. But can you imagine they really still haven't run this? It's incredible. But we're keeping the pot boiling. And there is now clear evidence that it is lapping over into the establishment. This scandal is now tipping. The Russia meddling scandal is now tipping from a Trump scandal to a Hillary Clinton and Democratic scandal. And you can watch it move in front of our eyes. Two separate investigations were announced today and yesterday, late yesterday, each by the House Judiciary Committee in concert with the House Intelligence Committee. One of them is into the uranium deal itself, and that will probe information from that confidential informant in the FBI who tracked the Russian bribery efforts, who has been muzzled by a gag order. And now the leaders of the congressional committees are meeting with Sessions to ask him to unmuzzle him and to permit him to testify, which now will almost certainly happen. And we'll get the details of this scandal, and it's going to come out and come out and come out. And they will also try to find out whether there was an FBI investigation into the deal originally, when it was made, into the uranium deal and into the Bill's payments from the Russians for the uranium. So this is very important. It's now trickling into dominating the coverage of what Congress is doing. And likewise, the email investigation of Hillary's emails is now going to be reopened by the House Judiciary Committee. And it will investigate why the FBI, rather than the Justice Department, recommended that Clinton not be charged after the investigation concluded. And what they really mean by that is, how did Comey feel free to draft his remarks exonerating Hillary and saying she wouldn't be prosecuted before he interviewed Hillary, before they interviewed 16 witnesses, and before the investigation was really underway? They'll also ask why the Bureau decided to openly declare that it was not prosecuting Hillary, which is not their usual policy, while at the same time they were keeping secret their investigations into Donald Trump. It'd be very interesting to see that stuff come out. But the important point is that it's coming out. The important point now is that when you refer to the Russia scandal, maybe even when you Google it, what comes up is now the Uranium One affair, not this ridiculous allegation of Russian meddling. By the way, the congressional committees have pretty well made it clear that they are not going to find any evidence of Russian collusion with Trump, and they say their investigation into it is likely to end without a resolution by the end of the year. Again, there's nothing there, so what is there to investigate? And I think increasingly, I've always said that this will double back on itself. What I meant by that is that at first you have the dossier, the charge, the accusation that Trump was working with the Russians. Then you learn that didn't happen. And then the question is, who wrote the dossier, who funded the dossier, and what role the FBI played. Now that trend, doubling back as I call it, is well underway. Just recently, just yesterday, Fusion GPS went into federal court before an Obama judge and asked to be relieved of complying with a subpoena to subpoena its client list, its donor list. And the judge gave them 2 days to argue why that should be the case. They claim their business would be destroyed if that happened. In fact, what will probably happen is a more limited subpoena that won't affect their outside clients. But clearly they are going to have to comply. And this whole investigation on the dossier is now moving onto the offensive. But more importantly now, it's been joined by the blowback over the uranium deal. And that is becoming the overshadowing issue. Now, just to summarize, because developments are fast and furious, to coin a phrase, but let me just enumerate them for you so we're straight on them. Number one, Hillary Clinton sat on a board that voted to let Russia take over 20% of our uranium deposits. Number two, Bill Clinton gave a speech in Moscow 3 or 4 months before that decision was made, for which he was paid $500,000, personal cash in his pocket. Number three, the FBI, through a confidential informant, has been investigating for several years a Russian bribery plot in the United States to try to get its hands on the uranium. Number four, in 2010, just a day before Bill Clinton gave his speech in Moscow, a 10-year investigation by the FBI was wrapped up, and 11 Russian spies were arrested who were sleeper agents who'd been planted in the United States. And their goal was, their mission was, to influence Hillary Clinton, to crowd around her, to get into her, to learn who were the key people. And one of the parts of that was that Alan Petrikov, who was one of Hillary's major donors, hired an accounting firm. And the accounting firm was a front, he didn't know this, for the Russians. And they sent somebody named Cynthia Murphy, a pseudonym, she was really a Russian, to work with him in accounting on his taxes. Petrikov's completely innocent, but I'm just giving you the fact. And this came out, and their goal was to facilitate the uranium deal as well. So you have the bribery with the 10 sleeper agents that ended in 2010, and then you have the bribery that the FBI informant is relating that was subsequent to that. Once the 10 spies were arrested, Hillary immediately moved to exchange them for 4 agents of very little consequence. 3 and 1 was kind of a borderline issue, but not people that we really needed back or really wanted back. And she pulled the deal in a matter of weeks, months, and before we could interrogate these 10 people thoroughly and before they could be tried. And that means before we had leverage over them. This was a new form of espionage by the Russians, and not a new form, but it was a new agency. It was a post-Cold War agency that was set up to do this. I think SVU or something like that. And we needed leverage over these spies of like life sentences to get them to cooperate and tell us what was going on. So before we could secure that leverage, Hillary arranged for them to be returned. We also know that when Bill Clinton went to Moscow to give that speech, he asked the State Department for permission to meet with the head of the Russian atomic program, who would have been the guy in charge of trying to get uranium. And when he couldn't meet, he was given permission, but the meeting was canceled, and Putin stepped in and said, I want to meet with Clinton personally, which probably means he wanted to deal with this issue himself with the president, and God knows what they discussed, whether there was a quid pro quo there. The next day he was getting the fee, and now Russia was getting the uranium. Was that discussed between Clinton and Putin? So, I mean, and then in addition, the Mueller is now investigating whether Tony Podesta, John Podesta's brother, failed to register as an agent of a foreign power when Russia employed him to lobby on the Magnitsky Act, the sanctions of various Russians. So, and Podesta is Hillary's campaign manager. So, I mean, you have all this stuff coming in at once, and it's unbelievable. And this momentum is now carrying this investigation way over. And it's no longer a Democratic effort to besmirch Trump. It's an effort to see what Hillary did in return for the uranium deal. And by the way, Trump, throughout the campaign, said that's what we should be focusing on, and now he's really being vindicated. Just incredible. And while this is going on, Hillary just said about this investigation, it's risen to the level where she had to comment on it. I would say that it's the same baloney they've been peddling for years, that there's been no credible evidence by anyone. In fact, it's been debunked repeatedly and will continue to be debunked. Hasn't been debunked. Hasn't even been bunked. It's now just arising for the first time. But here what they're doing, and I have to give them credit, Trump and his allies, including Fox News, are really experts at distraction and diversion. So the closer the investigation about the real Russian ties between Trump associates and real Russians gets closer, I'm now their favorite target, and they want to throw at me instead. That, of course, is the precise opposite of what's happening. In an effort to cloak her involvement in the uranium deal and the cash that her family received. Remember, a $500,000 payment to Bill Clinton is a $500,000 bribe to Hillary Clinton. That doesn't go to a campaign committee. It doesn't go to the foundation. It goes right in Hillary's pocketbook. It's an out-and-out bribe. And to distract from that, they did this whole thing about Trump and the Russians. And now she's saying it's the opposite. But we've got her clearly on the run. And this is very, very good news. Now, under the category of good news, the rhino hunting season is moving into high gear. I don't have anything against rhinoceros, but rhino, R-I-N-O, Republican in name only. And that's increasingly a description for many of the Republicans in the Senate. And now that we're hunting them, Steve Bannon is the leader of our hunt, and I'm helping. They're increasingly biting the dust. Bob Corker, the senator from Tennessee, whom we have to thank for the approval of the Iran deal, announced his retirement. And today, Jeff Flake of Arizona announced his retirement. As you know, I've been backing Kelly Ward, who ran against McCain and now is running against Flake. And the fact that Ward was actually ahead of Flake in the polls probably is why Flake decided to withdraw. And that withdrawal opens the way for Kelly Ward, a real conservative, to take that Senate seat in Arizona. But more importantly, if the rhinos are beginning to pull out, if they're beginning to say, hey, wait a minute, I see this train coming at me, I'm getting out of town before I get clobbered, that's a very interesting thing, because it really means that our effort to cleanse the Republican Party and make it a real instrument of conservatism is gaining momentum. There's one other thing nobody's writing about, but I do want to point out to you. When a candidate for the United States Senate drops out of the Senate race, he or she keeps the money, the campaign money they've collected. Can't spend it on him personally, but can on any activity that could be loosely related to any political objective. That would include his or her travel, staff, office, overhead, phone, internet, all kinds of stuff. So a lot of these folks are dropping out so they can keep their campaign money and live happily ever after. Now, today's video, which is once again sponsored by Patriot Gold Group. And if you want to know why we should invest in gold and silver, I have two words for you: North Korea. With Kim Jong-un loose in the world, with nuclear weapons and with missiles, the odds are that the world is going to totally panic and freak out at the threat, and certainly if any of those are used. Now, when the world freaks out, what that means is the markets go kaflooey, the confidence in the currencies crashes, and that means gold and silver soar. They've always been the bad news metals, the metals that go up when everything else is going down. And it makes sense to diversify your holdings and include more gold and silver. And as more people realize this, the price is going to go up, so it makes sense to get in now. PatriotGoldGroup.com, or the phone number see if I get this, 476-6786.
No.
No.
But I posted it. It's 1-800-476-5675.
Okay, listen to her, not me.
We have a ton of questions coming in here. First of all, everyone's noticing about Flake, but they're really excited. Hector Morales wants to know, is there any indication that Sessions might appoint a special counsel to investigate Mueller and Rosenstein-Comey?
Yes. People have been asking me this ever since I've been talking about this issue. But you have to realize that it takes time to build a consensus to do that. You really can't appoint a prosecutor until there's a consensus in Washington that one is really needed. And the first step would be the congressional investigations that I spoke about earlier in this video. And as those gather momentum and as new evidence comes out and the FBI informant is released from his gag order and he testifies and we learn what he was about to say, the momentum for a special prosecutor on this issue will grow. And once there's one appointed, even if he has a fairly narrow mandate, as you know, he can expand it very broadly. And the odds that it would involve Mueller, Comey, Rod Rosenstein, who appointed Mueller, and even Eric Holder, the former Attorney General, is pretty significant. I call those the gang of four.
Well, John Cahill writes in, but can Attorney General lift the gag order, or does it have to be federal court?
No, AG. It's imposed entirely by the FBI and by the AG.
Okay. And Brett Reed asks, the deep state blackmailing too many government. Is Jeff Sessions trying to cover stuff up?
Well, the jury's out on that. I don't know. He's a pretty honest guy and he's a pretty true conservative, but a lot of his actions raise a lot of questions. I think that, let me try to answer that fairly. I don't think that Sessions is, a closet liberal who's trying to do this. I do think that the Attorney General and the head of the FBI, both of whom are now Trump appointees, are sitting on top of agencies that are dominated by the extreme left as a result of Holder and Comey's and Mueller's stewardship for so many years. And they can't move against their bureaucracy too quickly. It takes time to turn the battleship around. And if they do it too quickly, they could lose credibility and functionally lose control over their agencies. When I worked for Bill Clinton as president, Janet Reno was an absolute complete disaster, our Attorney General. Clinton kept wanting to get rid of her, so did all of us, and ultimately she was totally dysfunctional because the Justice Department attorneys wouldn't give her the right time of day. And she was in almost open war with her own department. And you can't have that. If you have that, it's very hard to run a government. So I think you have to cut Sessions and Wray, the new head of the FBI, a little bit of slack, not a lot, but let this continue. Now, I predict that Sessions will free the FBI informant from the gag order, because otherwise he would not have set up a meeting with the two congressional committees on that subject. So we'll see.
Iris Sinclair wants to know, so what about Corker and Flake? Will this help the tax cuts?
Well, that's a good question. There's a real concern that I'm having that a bunch of dead rhinos could stand in the way, both of the tax cuts and of the deal on DACA. The tax cut, they're both on board, and I think it should be all right to go through. The DACA deal, though, is much more serious, and their Flake, because he's from Arizona, has a key voice in that. In fact, the Times reported today that there's a new committee of 6 or 7 members, Republicans largely, who are working on trying to craft a deal over DACA with the Democrats, just to recoup so that we can decode the words. DACA is the program that permits Dreamers to stay in the United States. Dreamers are people brought into the U.S. illegally as children with illegal parents who grew up in the U.S., who are therefore illegal. And Obama gave them an amnesty and put them on a path to citizenship. Trump revoked the executive order, but gave Congress 6 months to legislate a solution. He said if they don't act, he then will. So the Republicans are now trying to negotiate with the Democrats over what might be a solution. And the reason they have to negotiate is they probably can't get 52 Republicans on board for the same deal. Now, this represents the best opportunity for bipartisan immigration reform, good immigration reform, our kind, and for the border wall and for a lot of great stuff, because the Democrats need the DACA amnesty. They have 800,000 votes hanging in the balance there, and they need those folks to be granted amnesty. Now, they wouldn't be granted the vote initially. They would be able to stay here, get work, and then under some format reapply, get a green card, and then move on to being voters, citizens 15 or 20 years down the road. We don't know the details of that. But the important thing is not what happens with them, but the leverage that this gives us to extract concessions from the Democrats on immigration so that we can get their votes to build a border wall, and the E-Verify program, which is crucial. E-Verify is the most important step, even more important than the wall, because E-Verify says that no employer can give anyone a job unless he verifies their citizenship, and there'll be computer terminals in everybody's office to be able to do that. And it's a crucial step. But again, the Democrats are opposed to it, and the Rhino Republicans are opposed to it. So Flake and company issued a statement yesterday, or a leak yesterday, that said that the border is not wall is not under consideration, and E-Verify is now off the table. Instead, they're going to give the Democrats some improvements in border security and some extra money and some extra border patrol agents, nothing important. Now, that's horrible. Trump has to veto that. And my concern is that a guy like Flake is now out of the line of fire, which means he can't be held accountable, and he can now proceed to indulge his ultra-liberal fantasies. So we'll see how that goes. We have to stay on top of that.
Well, Mark Mendlovitz wants to know, there is a report that Mueller transported uranium to Moscow. Have you heard that?
No. There is a report that Mueller was involved with a group that invested in something like that. But I didn't think it was really credible enough to pursue it at this point.
Okay. And John Cahill asks, who is the one to lift gag order for the FBI agent and Uranium One deal?
Sessions.
Okay.
Now, a couple of other things that are interesting. First of all, you heard what I said about gold and the danger that North Korea poses and what that impact is likely to be. Well, it now turns out that North Korea has a formidable stockpile and is amassing more of biological and chemical weapons. I spoke to a major person in this issue about a month ago, and he raised the issue of biological warfare against Seoul if we attack North Korea. And he said that to him is more worrisome even than nuclear weapons, because if you use nuclear weapons, that triggers an automatic response that turns your country into a parking lot. But biological weapons, you might be able to get away with it. First of all, they spread slowly, very slowly. You release a plague virus, and 4 or 5 people come down, and then 20 and 30, and then 100, and then 1,000. And it's months before it's clear what really has happened. And that makes it very hard to have an instant, massive nuclear retaliation. So this could be a more convenient weapon for Kim Jong-un. Spreading plague and smallpox are the 2 specific viruses they're talking about. That could, of course, be solved by a massive program of inoculation in South Korea. But I don't know if they've done that.
Dick, Jennifer Young asks, do you believe the administration didn't destroy a lot of the evidence as they believed that Hillary was going to win the election?
That's exactly true. I think that this is a fertile field to look at because they didn't imagine that Hillary could lose the election. And in the 3 months before they took office, after Election Day, they were under pretty close scrutiny from the transition folks, and not sure it would have been that easy to destroy evidence. Now, in Germany, the number of terror incidents has quadrupled in the last year, literally from 200 odd to 800 or so terror attacks and incidents and cases are under investigation. From 2016, there were 200, and this year there are 800 so far. That is the consequence of unlimited Muslim immigration. It's the consequence of not having the kind of ban that Trump has now insisted on imposing. The ban's not yet approved by the courts, but it will be. Originally, when it was a ban on countries that had in common only a Muslim population, it could be construed as a religiously based ban, particularly because Trump called it that during the election. But now that it's been broadened and been made based on more objective criteria, it's probably going to be sustained by the courts. Probably would have been anyway with Gorsuch there, but it will take a little bit of time.
Anna Strange asks, please ask Mr. Morris to define middle class in terms of the president's proposed tax reform plan.
Well, the median household income in the United States is now $61,000. And so I guess you would say middle class is somewhere between $40,000 and $80,000, maybe 40 and 100. The key impact of the tax plan is that it will double the standard deduction, so that instead of getting $12,000 for a family of two, you get $25,000 or $24,000, which is huge. You can deduct that money right off the top, and it means you don't pay income taxes on that income. And in addition to the child tax credit and other stuff that's out there, it really means that 10 or 15% more of the American people will not pay income taxes. It means that probably, unless you're in a six-figure income or right below it, you probably don't pay much in income taxes, which is really incredible. There's one other issue about the tax cut that I'd like to talk about. You know, it's funny, I map out the topics, but then you all ask questions that anticipate them, so I don't have to get up to them on my cheat sheet here. There's a controversy about the 401ks. Currently, you can sock away $18,500 of tax-free income in your 401k, and it doesn't get taxed until you actually pull it out and live off it. And the idea is that you now might be in a higher tax bracket because you're working, but when you're retired, you might be in a lower or even a zero tax bracket, and then you can pull the money out and never pay taxes on it, or if you do, pay it at a lower rate. Now, some people have proposed that Trump is going to reduce that ceiling from $18,500 to something like $2,500, meaning that you could only exempt $2,500 of income from taxation by putting it into a 401k. And that'll decrease savings dramatically, screw up most people's retirement plans. Trump says it's definitely not going to happen, won't go on, but let's just be careful about that. That's something we need to be sure is not in the tax cut bill.
Chris Wellens asks, when do you think we'll see some arrests regarding the Uranium One deal?
Oh, we're long away from that. But you know, these things take time, but we're on the right track right now. Now, there's a bill that the farm lobby is passing that we really ought to talk about. The farm interests, the agricultural interests, I've often given some speeches in front of them, say, hey, look, we can't get American workers to pick our crops out here, and we'd have to pay them far too much money. It would raise food prices enormously. So please, let us import guest workers who would work in the United States, help us harvest the crops, and then be sent home when the harvest is over. They would not be citizens, they would not be able to get outside work, and they would be sent home. And they now are introducing a bill that's going through Congress that may well pass, it's still in committee, to create a 1 million low-wage visa program of guest workers. They would be paid slightly more than the minimum wage, but only slightly. They would not have housing, they would not have medical care. The employers would not have to pay Social Security taxes on them, and they would have access to low-cost workers. I'm against that. I believe that the most important thing to do is to raise the wages of the working class, so that we're not reduced to a third world wage scale. And while I sympathize with the firms and the businesses saying they can't do that and they can't compete, the answer to that is automate. Most of Western Europe and many other parts of the country have invested heavily in machinery to eliminate a lot of those jobs. And the other answer is, for those jobs that remain, pay a decent living wage and attract American workers to do those jobs. If it results in somewhat higher food prices, either ask Americans to pay them, or if they can't, impose tariffs so that we can continue to provide good jobs for working-class, low-skilled American workers. And I believe that's very important, and I believe that that issue politically puts a fissure within the Latino pro-democratic vote, because the Democrats oppose that, but it would be a very important step to giving people jobs so that they really could continue to stay here and do well, but not immigrants, Americans. The other thing that I ought to note is, since Trump took office, the number of Americans on food stamps has dropped by 1.5 million people. That's in only 8 months. Every single month the number keeps dropping. That's terrific. It's wonderful. Partially it's the better economy, partially it's that they're no longer rubber stamping every application.
Michelle Gravert asks, if all of the politicians on both sides of the aisle knew about the Uranium One deal and they did not report the crimes involved, are they complicit in some way?
Yeah, they are, but I don't think they all knew about it. Nobody really, we knew it was publicly available, but nobody paid any attention to the money that Bill Clinton got from Russia for giving that speech and that uranium deal until Peter Schweitzer wrote his wonderful book in 2015 and revealed that, the book Clinton Cash. That first called it to our attention. By the same token, nobody paid any attention to the vote that Hillary cast on the Committee on Foreign Investments to allow the sale of American uranium mines to the Russians to take place. It was only after Schweitzer connected those two that we began to see a connection. And now that they've revealed the FBI investigation of these Russian bribery attempts and revisited the issue of these 10 sleeper agents Russia planted in the United States, it's only then that we're really beginning to understand the depth of this deal.
Lynn Rogers says, mainstream media looks like they are in a meltdown over Flake and Corker resigning, or is it something else?
Well, rhinos are going out of season. And as more of them retire, yet more may be forced into retirement. When Flake announced his retirement today, a few hours ago, he said, it may not be possible for me to live within the new Republican Party. And to try to get the nomination of that party, I would have to do things, meaning take positions, that I don't want to do. And I couldn't live with myself doing it, or with my conscience. So I think there is a schism now that is becoming open in the Republican Party. The key player in here, one of the key players, is John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, and former governor, the governor, I think still. And you have Corker, and you have Flake, and you have others who are turning up their nose at the Republican Party of Donald Trump and saying they're just not going to go along with that. And the more this happens, the more it's a cleansing process that I think is a positive thing. Now, the conventional wisdom says that if the moderate Republicans pull out, leaving only the conservative activists or extremists, they would say, fewer and fewer people will vote Republican and Democrats will win more of the elections. That was the theory that was validated when Barry Goldwater lost massively in 1964. But after Reagan's victory in 1980, we reconsider that. And it could well be, and Trump indicates that it is, that the cleansing of the Republican Party by someone who opposes that establishment and that sort of go-along, get-along rhino view invigorates the party, swells the turnout, and really makes it a much more effective instrument for change and for reform. And I think you're looking at that process now going on throughout the country. Interesting development out of Saudi Arabia. Prince bin Salman, S-A-L-M-A-N, B-I-N, S-A-L-M-A-N, who is the crown prince, who was just anointed as the next king by the current king. He's 32 years old. He's modernist. He says that Saudi Arabia has to end its dependence on oil by 2030. Isn't that cool? For 50 years we've been talking about ending the American dependence on oil. Now we're talking about ending the Saudi dependence on oil, because oil is ending. And oil is no longer the scarce commodity that it used to be, and nobody can depend on high oil prices for their economy, just like they used to, entirely because of the development of fracking in the United States, which the liberals opposed like crazy. But thank God they weren't able to stop. Trump is now expanding, and it's reconfiguring the whole world so that the terrorists no longer have that kind of a slush fund. And now Saudi Arabian prince says we have to move away from oil. And, more significantly, more immediately, he said that he is going to reject extremism and wants to return Saudi Arabia to the moderate Islam that it was 30 and 40 years ago, before it was captured by terrorists. What a bold and gutsy thing for him to say and to think, and what a wonderful thing for him to do. This goes toward what I've been trying to say for many years. Wrote this in the late 90s, that if oil becomes plentiful through fracking and other stuff, and the price it no longer has the stranglehold on the global economy, the terrorists will lose their power. They'll lose their nation-state backing, they'll lose their financing, and it'll become yesterday's problem. And this development in Saudi Arabia, with Saudi Arabia being the source in the past of about 90% of the terror funding, is a very significant indication of that.
Dick, Jack Tapper wants to know who you recommend to replace Representative Murphy in Pennsylvania. Do you have any recommendations?
I don't, but I will.
Okay, great. And Thomas Hillebrand wants to know, will Sessions get deposed either by firing or quitting?
Yeah, I think it's very possible he'll be deposed. I think that's very possible. These investigations are now of how DOJ handled this stuff, and some of them relate to it since Sessions took over.
And Bill Ruth wants to know, why is McCain, Corker, etc. obstructing what obviously the American people want?
Well, they're from a different era, you know. They're from an era when party divisions were not that sharp, when the Democratic Party was not crazy. Listen, I used to be a conservative Democrat. If that existed, I might still be. But you can't be a conservative Democrat. You're either a Pelosi, Schumer, Harry Reid, Barack Obama, Eric Holder Democrat, or you're a Republican, so I'm a Republican. But they've extinguished the middle ground. And as the Democrats have extinguished their middle ground, the Republican alternative has to become more significant because it needs to incorporate major changes to undo all the garbage that the left has done to us. When the left's moves were slightly against our thinking, like under Clinton or under Carter, okay, there had to be minor responses. Moderate Republicans would be fine. But after Obama laid all of this stuff on us, totally revamped the American economy with regulation and taxes and sent it into an 8-year depression from which we're now emerging, weakened our national defenses, and burdened our healthcare system and almost destroyed it. We need fundamental change, and the Republicans in the Senate are just not up for that.
Richard Morholt Sr. asks, what is the true approval rating of the Trump administration? The liberal press seems to be obscuring the truth.
Yeah, they are. They're obscuring it because they survey all people, not likely voters. And I've done my own survey about Trump's approval about 2 months ago, and 6 weeks ago. And I found his approval rating at 50. And that was done of only real voters. Now, that was a while ago, and it may have gone up since then. 50, no, I think 48. I would say that Trump's approval among people that actually vote is probably over 50 at this point.
Excellent.
But bear in mind, we won with like 48.5% of the vote. What we need to do is to hold on to that, and I think we're doing that well.
And Susanna Canterbury asks, why does Hillary Clinton still have her campaign personnel on her payroll?
Well, she still has money. She transferred $800,000 from her campaign account to various resistance groups, they call them, left-wing Democratic groups. And they hired a lot of Hillary's staff and provided them back to Hillary in many cases. And she still has more than enough people. Also, remember, the Clintons become very wealthy as a result of their book deals, the speaking fees, the Clinton Foundation, and everything else. So they can afford to pay for that, although Hillary will do so with trembling hands. She hates to spend money.
Linda Gale Hudson asks, can you give us the inside scoop on the Clinton Foundation now in Canada? It's my understanding that they don't have to report their donations there.
They don't. They voluntarily did before the election. They probably won't anymore. And the Clinton Foundation in Canada was founded by Frank Giustra, who's the uranium guy that brokered this whole deal. And he, in response to Clinton going to Kazakhstan and meeting with the dictator there and kind of legitimizing him by appearing with him, Giustra gave the Clintons $145 million to set up a new Clinton Foundation in Canada. And that's what we're talking about. So listen, first of all, thank you very much. This is terrific. And I love that we have so many people watching. And
We have 1,000 people right now.
1,000 now.
Yes.
Good. And I urge you to share this all over the place, because this is really Radio Free Europe. This is the news the media won't bring you. And I appreciate you being there. Thank you.
Don't.
The selfie of the
Yes.
day, that is the person who's holding up that wonderful book, Rogue Spooks, and it's on our homepage, is Vicky Newby, Newby. Thank you, Vicky.
Oh, before
And
you go,
also-
we're top 5 in the world right now.
Oh, it's fifth in the world. Good. And also, I just want to remind you that if you want a signed book plate, like for Christmas or something, that you could put in Rogue Spooks or any of the books that we've written, please email Dick Morris Promo,
Promos.
Dick Morris Promos with an S, at gmail.com. And give us your information and what you want me to write. Dear Uncle Harry, happy birthday, or something like that. Thanks. We'll see you later.